What would you do if choosing love meant betraying everything you were raised to believe? In the heart of the Arizona desert, a young warrior faces an impossible decision. Follow ancient traditions or protect a woman who shouldn't even exist. In his world, when her past catches up and armed men demand her return, he must choose between duty to his people and the truth burning in his heart. This is a story of forbidden love, silent rebellion, and the courage to build bridges between worlds that were never meant to touch. If you're ready for a tale that will challenge everything you think you know about love and loyalty, hit that like button, subscribe for more epic stories, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's dive into this incredible journey. The desert held its breath when Leah arrived. She felt it in the way the wind ceased its constant whisper through the canyon walls, in how even the lizards paused their scurrying across sun-baked stone. Her wrists bore the ghost weight of bindings, recently removed, though the rope burns had faded days ago. What remained was something deeper, an ache that lived in the space between her ribs where fear had taken root and refused to let go. The Navajo settlement spread before her like a mirage made real. Adobe structures seemed to grow from the red earth itself, their walls the color of dried blood under the relentless Arizona sun. Smoke curled from cooking fires, carrying scents of juniper and something else, something wild and unfamiliar that made her stomach clench with homesickness for a place she could no longer name. Leah's fingers found the silver pendant at her throat, a habit born of anxiety. The metal was warm against her skin, absorbing heat like everything else in this place that seemed carved from fire and time. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her. Memory. When you're lost, child, touch what connects you to love. But love felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. The warriors who had brought her here stood at a respectful distance, their faces unreadable as carved stone. She had learned not to search their eyes for answers. In 3 days of travel they had spoken only when necessary. Their words weighted with meaning she couldn't decipher. Their silence wasn't cruel, it was careful, like handling something that might break if touched too roughly. Now she waited, though for what she couldn't say. The sun pressed against her shoulders with familiar insistence. She had grown up under skies this wide, though in a different desert among different people. The irony wasn't lost on her. Captured while seeking refuge, now seeking refuge from her captives. Life had become a series of circles within circles, each one smaller than the last. A shadow fell across her feet, and she looked up to find herself face to face with a young man who seemed made of contradictions. His black hair caught the light like obsidian, braided with strips of leather and small silver beads that chimed softly when he moved. But it was his eyes that held her, dark as midnight water, yet somehow carrying light in their depths. He stood with the easy grace of someone born to this harsh landscape. Yet there was a gentleness in his stance that surprised her. "I am Kehé," he said, his voice lower than she'd expected. The words carried an accent that turned the familiar sound soft and round. "I will watch over you." Leah's throat worked around. Words that wouldn't come. Watch over, not guard, not restrain. The distinction felt important, though she couldn't say why. "The elders will decide," he continued, his gaze moving past her to the mountains that ringed their valley like sleeping giants. "Until then, you are under my protection." She nodded because it seemed expected, though the word protection tasted strange in her mind. From what was she being protected? From whom? The questions multiplied like desert flowers after rain, sudden, colorful and somehow dangerous in their beauty. Kehé gestured toward a small dwelling at the edge of the settlement. "So, you will stay there. Food will be brought, water." He paused, and for a moment, something almost like uncertainty flickered across his features. "Do you understand?" "Yes." The word came out rougher than intended, carrying dust and thirst despite the water they'd given her that morning. He studied her face as if memorizing it, then nodded once and turned to go. But something made him pause, some invisible thread, tugging him back. When he looked at her again, Leah felt an odd recognition stir in her chest, not of his face, but of something deeper, the way sorrow recognizes sorrow across any distance. "What is your name?" he asked. "Leah," he repeated it carefully, tasting the foreign syllables. Leah, then almost to himself, "Star." She blinked, startled. "How did you in the old language?" he said, then seemed to catch himself. Color rose beneath his bronze skin. My grandmother, taught me words from many tongues. She said, knowledge of names is sacred." Something loosened in Leah's chest, a knot she hadn't realized was there. Star. She had forgotten that her name meant star in the language her own grandmother had whispered over her cradle. To hear it translated here in this place between worlds felt like a small miracle. Kehé's eyes lingered on her face a moment longer. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the packed earth. Leah watched until he disappeared, around a corner, feeling strangely bereft as if a door had opened, only to close again before she could step through. The desert exhaled around her, releasing the held breath of the day into evening's cooler embrace. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness in the world. She touched her grandmother's pendant again and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might be listening in this place where earth met sky. The words felt small against the vastness, but they were hers, and that would have to be enough. Dawn came like a gentle intrusion, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that reminded Leah of her grandmother's jewelry box. She had been awake for hours, listening to the settlement come alive around her. The soft murmur of voices, the crackle of fires being fed, the rhythmic sound of corn being ground for the morning meal. Through the small window of her dwelling, she could see Kehé. He sat perhaps 20 ft away, his back against a boulder, whittling something from a piece of pale wood. The concentration on his face was absolute, each knife stroke deliberate and sure. She found herself studying the line of his shoulders, the way his hands moved with practiced grace, the small furrow between his brows that spoke of someone who took his responsibilities seriously. He had been there when she'd fallen asleep, a silent sentinel against the star-ricked darkness. Now, as the sun climbed higher, he remained as constant as the mountains themselves. Leah's stomach cramped with hunger, but more than that, with a peculiar kind of restlessness. She was accustomed to motion, to purpose. This waiting, this suspended existence between one life and whatever came next, felt like drowning in slow. A soft knock at the door made her start. An elderly woman entered without waiting for permission, carrying a clay bowl that steamed with aromatic heat. Her face was weathered like old leather, deeply lined with the geography of laughter and sorrow. Silver hair hung in a single braid. Down her back decorated with turquoise beads that caught the morning light. "I am Asta," the woman said, setting the bowl on the low table. Kehé's grandmother. Leah's pulse quickened. This was the woman who had taught him the meaning of names, who had given him the knowledge to translate Leah into star. She looked carefully at Asdar's face, searching for judgment or hostility, but found only curiosity, tempered with kindness. "Thank you," Leah said, gesturing to the bowl. The smell rising from it was complex, corn and chili and something green that reminded her of rain. Asdar settled herself on a woven mat with the fluid movement of someone who had been folding herself. "Into such positions for 70 years. You speak our words a little." Leah had picked up fragments during the journey enough to understand basic needs and courtesies. "Your grandson, he's been very kind." Something shifted in the older woman's expression. A flicker of surprise, perhaps, or concern. T takes his duties seriously, sometimes too seriously. She paused, studying Leah with eyes that seemed to see beneath the surface of things. But duty and kindness are not always the same thing. The words carried weight that Leah couldn't quite decipher. She lifted the bowl to her lips, tasting the complex blend of flavors. Corn sweetened with honey, chili that burned gently, herbs that spoke of careful cultivation in an unforgiving climate. It was delicious, but more than that, it was an offering. Food prepared with intention, seasoned with something that might have been hope. Why am I here? The question escaped before Leah could stop it. I mean, I know I was taken, but why am I still here? Why haven't the elders decided? As Zar's weathered hands smoothed over her skirt, a gesture that spoke of long practice in choosing. Words carefully. The elders debate many things. Your presence here has stirred old questions. Questions about who belongs to the people and what it means to be safe in an unsafe world. I'm not a threat. No, as agreed, you are not. But sometimes what threatens us most is not danger, but change. Through the window, Leah could see Kehé's profile as he worked. The small piece of wood was taking shape under his knife. Something rounded and smooth, though its purpose remained unclear. His movements were meditative, almost prayerful, as if he were coaxing the object from its wooden prison rather than carving it. He's been out there all night, Leah said. Yes. Doesn't he have other duties, other places to be? Asa's smile was small but knowing. My grandson is, how do you say, thorough in his commitments. When he is asked to watch over something, he watches completely. There was something in the way she said it that made Leah's cheeks warm. She took another sip of the stew, trying to ignore the way her attention kept drifting to the window, to the young man who guarded her with such careful dedication. The wood he carves, Leah ventured. What is it? A gift, Asdar said simply, though for whom I cannot say. The older woman rose with the same fluid grace she'd shown in sitting, gathering the folds of her skirt around her. At the door she paused. Leah, Star, you carry light in your name. Sometimes light reveals things that have been hidden. Sometimes it casts new shadows. Both can be dangerous. Then she was gone, leaving Leah alone with the lingering scent of sage and the weight of words she didn't fully understand. Outside, Kehé continued his careful work, and the morning sun climbed higher, painting everything in shades of gold and possibility. The third day brought wind that tasted of distant rain, and carried voices from the council lodge, like fragments of a song Leah couldn't understand. She sat in the shade of a ramada, watching Kehé's cousin teach children to weave baskets from willow reeds. Their laughter punctuated the air like bright stones thrown into still water. Kehé had moved closer since dawn, settling himself against a cedar post where he could see both the council lodge and her dwelling. The small wooden object was nearly complete now. Leah could see it was an animal of some kind, though the details remained indistinct from her vantage point. She had been trying to understand the rhythm of this place, the ebb and flow of a community that seemed to breathe with the landscape itself. There were patterns here, ancient and observed. Times for work and rest, for gathering and solitude, for speaking and for the deeper communication of silence. A commotion near the council lodge drew her attention. Several men emerged, their faces grave, gesturing with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested important decisions were being made. Leah's pulse quickened. Were they discussing her fate? Planning her departure, her execution? The last thought came unbidden and made her stomach clench with fear. She had been treating this strange captivity as temporary, a pause between one life and another. But what if it wasn't? What if the kindness she'd been shown was simply the courtesy extended to someone already condemned? Her hand found her grandmother's pendant, worrying the smooth silver between her fingers. The metal was warm, almost hot in the afternoon heat, but comforting in its familiarity. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her grandmother's voice, the stories she used to tell, about courage and patience, and trusting the wisdom of the earth. "You are afraid?" Leah opened her eyes to find Kehé standing nearby. He had approached so quietly she hadn't heard him moving with the ghostute silence she was beginning to associate with his people. In his hands he held the wooden carving, a small horse she could see now, its lines clean and graceful, captured mid-gallop as if frozen in eternal motion. Yes, she admitted, there seemed no point in lying to someone whose job it was to watch her every expression. "I don't know what's being decided in there." Kaa's gaze moved to the council lodge, then back to her face. The elders debate the meaning of boundaries, physical ones, spiritual ones, the boundaries between obligation and compassion. He settled himself on the ground beside her, close enough that she could smell the cedar smoke that clung to his clothes, the clean scent of desert wind in his hair. The intimacy of it surprised her. He had maintained careful distance until now, professional and proper in his guardianship. "Your grandmother said I carry light in my name," Leah said, "but she also said light can be dangerous. Asa is wise." Kehé turned the wooden horse over in his hands, examining it from all angles. Light reveals truth. Truth can be inconvenient. What? Truth? He was quiet for so long that Leah thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was careful, weighted with thought that boundaries are not always walls. Sometimes they are bridges. The words hung between them like an offering, significant, in ways Leah couldn't quite grasp. She studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers worried over the wooden horse, as if it held answers to questions he hadn't yet learned to ask. "May I see it?" she asked. Kehé hesitated, then placed the carving in her outstretched palm. The wood was warm from his touch, smooth as riverstone. The horse was beautiful, not ornate or decorative, but captured with the kind of precision that spoke of deep observation. Every line suggested movement, freedom, the wild grace of something that refused to be contained. "It's beautiful," she said. "Who is it for?" Color rose in his cheeks, subtle but unmistakable. I am not certain yet." Leah ran her thumb along the horse's mane, feeling the tiny ridges where Kehé's knife had shaped each strand. There was something personal in this carving, something that went beyond mere craftsmanship. It felt like a prayer made tangible, a wish carved from living wood. In my grandmother's stories, she said, horses were messengers between worlds. They carried souls from one place to another when the path was too difficult to walk alone. Kehé's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or the acknowledgement of a possibility neither had quite dared to name. The moment stretched, waited with unspoken words, until the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. An older man approached, his face painted, with the gravity of one who carried unwelcome news. He spoke rapidly to Kehé in their language, his tone urgent. Leah watched understanding dawn in Kay's expression, followed by something that might have been anger or fear or both. When the man left, Kay was quiet for a long moment, his hands clenched around the wooden horse. "What did he say?" Leah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "The council has reached a decision," Tsi said, his voice carefully neutral. "Tomorrow, you will be taken to the territorial boundary and released." Relief and disappointment warred in Leah's chest. Freedom, yes, but freedom to go where? To return to what? The life she'd been fleeing when she'd stumbled into this desert sanctuary felt as distant and impossible as the stars. "That's good." She managed. "I'll be free." Kehé looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "Yes, he said. Free. But the words sounded hollow in the desert air, like an echo with no source. And Leah wondered if freedom always felt this much like falling. Night fell with unusual swiftness, as if the sky were eager to pull darkness over the days. Decisions. Leah sat in her doorway, watching the stars emerge one by one, like silver pinpricks in black cloth. Tomorrow she would be gone from this place, would walk back into a world that had little use for women who traveled alone, who carried their entire lives in a worn saddlebag and the memories held in a silver pendant. The settlement had grown quiet around her, settling into the peaceful rhythm of evening. Somewhere a baby cried briefly before being soothed. A dog barked once, then fell silent. The smell of cooking fires drifted on the air, mixed with sage, and the green scent that preceded rain. Kehé had not returned since receiving the council's message. Leah found herself looking for him despite her better judgment, her eyes searching the shadows for his familiar silhouette. His absence felt like a missing tooth, noticeable precisely because of how accustomed she'd become to his presence. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising the first rain in weeks. The air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation, charged with the electric tension that preceded desert storms. Leah stepped outside, letting the wind tangle her hair as she watched lightning flicker between the mountains, like trapped spirits seeking release. You should go inside. She turned to find Kehé approaching through the darkness, moving with that same ghostly silence that seemed natural to him. But something in his manner was different tonight, less controlled, more human somehow. His hair had come loose from its braid, and there was a wildness in his expression that matched the approaching storm. I love the rain, she said. Where I come from, it means life returning to dead places. Where you come from? He stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the way lightning reflected in his dark eyes. Where is that, Leah? The question surprised her. In 3 days no one had asked about her origins, her past, the circumstances that had led her to wander alone in territorial lands. It was as if she had simply materialized from the desert itself, fully formed and without history. California, she said, a valley south of the missions. My grandmother raised me thereafter. She paused, uncertain how much truth to share after my parents died. And you left because staying meant marrying a man twice my age who looked at me like I was livestock to be bought and bred. The words came out harsher than intended, carrying all the bitterness of a choice that hadn't really been a choice at all. So I ran, kept running until I ended up here. Kehé absorbed this information in silence, his expression thoughtful. Rain began to fall in earnest now, fat drops that struck the earth with audible impact, releasing the petrichor scent that meant redemption to desert dwellers. Come, he said, gesturing toward the Ramada, where they would be sheltered, but could still feel the storm's presence. There is something I wish to tell you. They settled on woven mats as the rain intensified, drumming against the Ramada's roof with increasing urgency. Kehé pulled something from his pocket, the wooden horse, and set it carefully between them. In the dim light, it seemed almost alive, as if it might break into motion at any moment. Tomorrow, when they take you to the boundary, he said, his voice barely audible above the rain. What will you do? Leah considered lying, offering some confident plan for her future. But the storm seemed to demand honesty, and she found herself speaking truth instead. I don't know. We'll keep running, I suppose. Try to find some place where a woman alone isn't seen as prey or problem. Such a place exists. I have to believe it does. Kehé picked up the wooden horse, turning it over in his hands. In our stories, horses choose their riders as much. As riders choose horses, the bond cannot be forced. It must be recognized, accepted by both. Leah watched his face in the flickering light, trying to understand where he was leading with this metaphor. And if the recognition is mutual, then they become partners in ways that transcend ownership. The horse carries the rider, yes, but the rider also carries the horse in memory, in dreams, in the places where souls meet souls. Lightning illuminated his face for an instant, revealing an expression of such naked longing that Leah's breath caught. In that moment she understood that they were no longer talking about horses, had perhaps never been talking about horses. "Kehé," she began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish." He set the carving down and looked directly at her, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "The council's decision. It is wisdom according to the old ways. You are not of the people. Your presence here creates complications, questions about tradition and change, and what it means to be safe in a world that grows smaller each day. I understand. But wisdom is not always the same as truth." His voice had dropped to a whisper, nearly lost beneath the rain's percussion. "And the truth is that in 3 days you have changed something in me that I did not know could be changed. You have shown me that boundaries can be bridges, as I told you, but I did not tell you the whole truth." Leah's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it over the storm. What truth? That sometimes bridges carry more than travelers. Sometimes they carry transformations. He reached for the wooden horse, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he pulled a thin strip of leather from around his neck on which hung a small turquoise stone worn smooth by generations of handling. "This belonged to my grandfather," he said, "and his grandfather before him. It is said to protect travelers on long journeys, to guide them safely between worlds." Leah stared at the necklace, understanding the significance of what he was offering, even as part of her mind recoiled from accepting it. "I can't. This belongs to your family. My grandfather traveled far in his youth. He learned many languages, married a woman from another tribe, brought new stories back to the people." Kehé's fingers worked to untie the leather cord. The elders of his time said he was diluting the blood, corrupting tradition. But his children were strong, and their children were strong, and they carried both worlds in their hearts. He held the necklace out to her, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Wear this, and you carry a piece of this place with you. But more than that," he paused, seeming to gather courage. "More than that, you carry the knowledge that someone here sees you as you truly are. Star, light-bringer, bridge between worlds." Leah's throat was tight with emotion she couldn't name. To accept would be to acknowledge something that had been growing between them in stolen glances and careful words. To refuse would be to deny the connection that had made her captivity. Feel less like imprisonment and more like coming home. The council has made their decision about your body. Kehé said they cannot make decisions about your spirit or mine. The rain fell harder now, creating a curtain of sound that seemed to separate them from the rest of the world. In this sheltered space, with stormlight flickering across his face, Kehé looked like something from her grandmother's stories, a spirit guide perhaps, or a guardian sent to help her navigate the space between one life and another. Slowly, she reached out and took the necklace from his hands. The turquoise was warm, as if it held some inner fire, and the leather cord was soft with age and use. When she lifted it over her head, settling it against her throat beside her grandmother's pendant, she felt something shift in the world, some fundamental realignment that made the familiar strange and the impossible suddenly real. "Thank you," she whispered. Kehé's smile was small but radiant, like sunrise over desert mountains. "Thank you for seeing the bridge." They sat in comfortable silence as the storm raged around them, two souls finding shelter in each other's presence while the world washed clean outside. And though neither spoke of what would come with morning, both understood that some transformations once begun cannot be undone. Dawn revealed a world transformed by rain. The desert, which had seemed eternally parched, now bloomed with life as seeds long dormant burst into sudden flower. The air smelled of wet earth and possibility of growth nurtured by patient waiting and sudden abundance. Leah woke with the turquoise pendant warm against her skin, proof that the previous night's revelation had not been a dream. Beside her grandmother's silver, it felt like a promise, though of what she couldn't yet say. Through her window, she could see that Kehé's usual post was empty, the boulder where he'd kept his vigilant watch now standing bare in the morning light. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door, expecting Asda with breakfast, but instead found a young woman, perhaps her own age, carrying a bundle of clothing and a clay water vessel painted with geometric designs in red and black. "I am Ayana," the woman said, her English careful but clear. "Kehé's cousin. I am to help you prepare for the journey." There was something in her tone that suggested she found the impending departure distasteful, though whether from sympathy for Leah or disappointment in the council's decision, it was impossible to say. Ayana was beautiful in the way of desert flowers, subtle at first glance, but revealing new depths of complexity the longer one looked. Her hair fell in two long braids, decorated with silver and coral, and her dress was finely woven, dyed in shades that echoed the earth after rain. "Prepare how?" Leah asked, stepping aside to let Ayana enter. Clean clothes, clean water for washing, food for travel. Ayana set her burdens down with the efficient movements of someone accustomed to caring for others. "The sun is still low. You have time before." She didn't finish the sentence, but Leah understood. Before the escort arrived to take her away from this place that had somehow become sanctuary, as Ayana bustled about preparing the washing water and laying out garments, Leah found herself studying the woman's face for clues about Kay's state of mind. If he had confided in anyone about the previous night's conversation, it would likely be this cousin who moved with such purposeful care. "Kehé spoke of you," Ayana said suddenly, as if sensing Leah's thoughts. "He said you understood things without words being spoken." Leah's pulse quickened. "Where is he this morning with the horses? The council requires fresh mounts for your escort." Ayana's hands stilled in their work, and when she looked at Leah, her expression was complicated. "He volunteers for duties that take him away from the camp today." The implication was clear. C was avoiding her departure, unable to watch her, walk away into an uncertain future. The knowledge brought both pain and a strange kind of relief. If saying goodbye was difficult for him, it meant the connection she felt was real, mutual, significant enough to cause hurt. "Ayana," Leah said, carefully, "may I ask you something? Of course, your cousin. Has there ever been talk of him marrying, taking a wife from the people?" Ayana's smile was small and knowing. "There has been talk. There is always talk. Kehé is considered a good match, strong, skilled, honorable. But he," she paused, choosing words with care, "he has always seemed to be waiting for something, some sign that the right path had revealed itself. And now there is different talk." Ayana's hands resumed their work, smoothing the dress she'd brought. Talk about bridges and boundaries, about whether love recognizes the same borders that fear creates. Leah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Perhaps not yet." Ayana held up the dress. Beautiful work in deep blue cotton decorated with silver threads that caught the light like captured stars. But understanding has a way of coming when we are ready to receive it. As Leah washed and changed into the traveling clothes, she found herself thinking about bridges and boundaries, about the difference between walls that kept danger out and those that kept life from flowing in. The dress fit perfectly, as if made for her, and she wondered if this was Ayana's work, or if the careful measurements had been taken by eyes that had watched her with more attention than mere duty required. "There," Ayana said, stepping back, to examine her work. "Now you look like yourself again." Leah caught her reflection in the polished metal mirror Ayana held up and was startled by what she saw. The woman looking back at her was not the frightened refugee who had arrived 3 days ago. This woman had clear eyes and straight shoulders, wore her clothing like armor chosen rather than accepted. The 2 pendants at her throat, silver and turquoise past and possibility, seemed to anchor her in ways that went beyond the merely physical. "I look," she began, then stopped, uncertain how to finish. "You look like someone who knows her own worth," Ayana said, simply like someone who has remembered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important than fear. A commotion outside interrupted the moment. Horses' hooves, men's voices, the sound of equipment being checked and secured. The escort had arrived. Ayana pressed a small leather pouch into Leah's hands. Food for the journey, but also she glanced. Toward the door, then back. Also something my grandmother always said, that every ending is a beginning wearing different clothes. "Will I see Kehé before he is with the horses?" Ayana repeated, but her tone suggested this was answer enough. Leah understood. He would be there maintaining his duty, even as his heart pulled him in directions that tradition would not allow. He would see her safely to the boundary, because that was what honor required, even if it meant carrying a wound that might never fully heal. "Tell him," Leah began, then stopped. What could she say that wouldn't make this harder than it already was? "Tell him I understand about bridges." Ayana nodded solemnly. "I will tell him." Outside, the voices grew more insistent. Time had run out for preparation for last words, for the luxury of delay. Leah gathered her few possessions, secured her grandmother's pendant and Kehé's turquoise beneath the dress, and stepped out into the morning light to meet whatever came next. The horses were magnificent, desert-bred, lean and strong, with eyes that held the same wild intelligence she'd seen in their riders. And there, holding the reins of a paint mare, was Kehé. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Leah felt something pass between them that needed no words, recognition, gratitude, the ache of roads not taken. He was dressed for travel, armed and ready, every inch the warrior he'd been trained to be. But in his eyes she saw the man who had carved horses from wood and offered protection wrapped in understanding. "It is time," said the elder who led the escort party. Leah nodded and walked toward her horse, toward the boundary, toward the unknown, territory that waited beyond the mountains. But with each step she carried the weight of turquoise against her throat, and the knowledge that some bridges once built exist forever in the landscapes of the heart. The ride to the boundary passed in silence, punctuated only by the steady rhythm of hooves on stone and the jingle of harness metal. Leah rode between 2 warriors with Kehé, bringing up the rear close enough that she could feel his presence, like warmth at her back, distant enough that propriety was maintained. The older warriors spoke occasionally in their own language, their words carried away by wind that tasted of sage and coming heat. As the sun climbed higher, the landscape changed. The red rocks gave way to grey limestone, and the vegetation grew sparse and different. Hardy plants that spoke of boundaries, of places where one ecosystem met another and fought for dominance. This was contested territory in more ways than one. Land that belonged fully to neither the Navajo nor the expanding territorial government, where treaties were written in water, and survival depended on understanding the difference between law and justice. Leah found herself studying Kehé's profile when she thought he wouldn't notice. His face was carefully neutral, but she'd learned to read the subtle signs of tension in his jaw, the way his eyes scanned the horizon with more than professional interest. He was troubled, she realized, not just by her departure, but by something else, some knowledge that weighted his shoulders with responsibility she couldn't yet fathom. They stopped to rest the horses at a natural spring that bubbled up from between limestone slabs, creating a small oasis of green in the increasingly austere landscape. The water was clear and cold, tasting of minerals and deep earth. As Leah knelt to drink, she noticed Kehé approaching the elder who led their party. Their conversation carried out in urgent whispers. "Trouble?" she asked. When Kehé returned the checker horse's tack, he glanced around, ensuring they couldn't be overheard. "Tracks," he said quietly. "Horses shot in the American style. Perhaps 6 riders moving fast toward the boundary." Leah's stomach clenched. Looking for someone, perhaps, his hands stilled on the leather straps. "Leah, if there is something, anything about your past that might bring danger to this place, you must tell me now." The question she'd been dreading finally spoken aloud. Leah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of secrets she'd carried for months, pressing against her ribs like a caged bird seeking flight. When she opened them again, Kehé was watching her with an intensity that made lying impossible. "The man I was supposed to marry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas Garrett. He has connections. Territorial politicians, army officers, men who believe the desert should be emptied of natives to make room for progress." Kay's expression darkened. "And he would pursue you because his reputation depends on controlling what belongs to him. A runaway bride makes him look weak, indecisive, bad for business." Leah's hand found the pendants at her throat, drawing comfort from their familiar weight. Dee thought I'd gone far enough, traveled far enough to be safe. But if he's tracked me, here he brings danger to the people. It wasn't a question. Leah nodded, shame burning in her throat like swallowed acid. "I should have told you before, you should have nothing." Kaa's voice was firm, cutting through her spiral of guilt. "You fled danger. We offered sanctuary. That you bring. Complications does not make you responsible for other men's evil." The simple absolution in his words nearly brought tears to her eyes. She had spent so long believing that her presence anywhere was a burden, a problem to be managed, rather than a gift to be received. To hear this someone speak of her flight as justified, her presence as welcome despite its difficulties, felt like water after years of thirst. "The boundary is still 2 hours ahead," Kehé continued, his eyes moving to scan the horizon. "If Garrett's men are there, they'll take me back." Leah's voice was steadier than she felt. "And if the people are seen helping me, it could be used as justification for action against the settlement." Kaa's jaw tightened, harboring fugitives, interfering with territorial law. They both understood what that meant. Military intervention, forced relocation, the destruction of a way of life that had endured for generations, sacrificed on the altar of one man's wounded pride and the territorial government's hunger for land. "There has to be another way," Leah said. "Some path that doesn't end with your people paying for my mistakes." Kehé was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between the horizon and her face. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. "There is," he said, "but it requires trust and courage and the willingness to walk a path that has never been walked before." "What path?" Before he could answer, the elder called out that it was time to move. The horses were watered. The brief rest over. As they mounted and resumed their journey toward the boundary, Leah felt the weight of unfinished conversation hanging between them, like a bridge half-be built, waiting for the courage to complete its span. The sun climbed higher, and with it the sense that they were riding towards something that would require more than mere departure to resolve. In the distance, dust clouds marked the passage of riders moving fast across open ground, and Leah found herself touching Kehé's turquoise pendant like a talisman against the gathering storm. Some boundaries, she was beginning to understand, were not meant to be crossed alone. The boundary marker was a single stone can rising from the flat expanse like a monument to the human need to divide the indivisible. Beyond it, the land looked identical. Same red earth, same scattered vegetation, same endless sky, but invisible lines drawn on distant maps declared it different, foreign, no longer safe for those who moved without the protection of proper papers and pale skin. Leah could see them now. The riders Kehé had tracked, 6 men on horseback waiting in whatever shade they could find, near a cluster of boulder formations. Even at this distance, she recognized the rigid posture of the lead rider, the expensive cut of his clothing despite the dust of hard travel. Thomas Garrett had indeed followed her into the desert, and he had not come alone. "Soldiers," Kehé said quietly, noting the blue uniforms among the group. "Territorial cavalry." The implications sent ice through Leah's veins. Despite the heat, Garrett hadn't just pursued her. He'd convinced the territorial government that her rescue was a matter of official concern. She could imagine the story he'd told, innocent white woman corrupted by savage influence. Civilization's duty to reclaim its own from the darkness of the wilderness. "They'll use this," she said, understanding flooding through her like cold water. "My presence here, your people helping me, they'll use it to justify whatever they were already planning." The elder who led their party raised his hand, bringing the small group to a halt, still several hundred yards from the boundary. He spoke rapidly to Kehé in their own language, his tone urgent. Leah watched the exchange, reading tension in their body language, even when the words remained foreign to her. "He asks if you go willingly," Kehé translated, "if we should deliver you to these men, as the council decreed." Leah looked across the empty space toward the waiting riders, toward the man whose ownership of her had been decreed by law, if not by consent. She thought of the life that waited there, comfortable perhaps, secure in its own way, but empty of everything that made existence worth the effort. A life of pretty dresses and careful silence, of children raised to perpetuate cycles of possession and control. And if I don't go willingly, then we have a problem that cannot be solved by following the old rules. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Leah understood that they were approaching a moment of choice that would ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, affecting not just her fate, but the future of everyone she'd come to care about in this harsh, beautiful place. He said, turning to face him fully, "Last night you spoke of bridges. What did you mean?" His dark eyes met hers, and she saw the struggle there. Duty wearing with desire, tradition fighting against the pull of transformation. When he spoke, his voice was low, meant for her ears alone. "I meant that some spaces between worlds are not meant to be barriers but passages, places where new ways of being become possible." He paused, glancing toward the waiting riders, then back to her. "But crossing requires leaving the old world behind. All of it. All of it." Leah felt the weight of the choice settling on her shoulders, like a mantle of lead and light combined. To go with Garrett meant safety of a sort, the familiar prison of expectations and roles she understood. To refuse meant stepping into unknown territory with no map, but the compass of her own heart. She touched the turquoise pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth, remembering the story of Kehé's grandfather, who had brought new worlds back to the people. Sometimes she realized courage wasn't about facing the unknown, it was about choosing which unknown to face. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what then? Where do we go that's safe from territorial law and traditional judgment both?" Kehé's smile was small but fierce, like the first light of dawn touching desert peaks. "Where the people have always gone when the old ways no longer serve the new world. To the places between places where survival depends on adaptation rather than rigid adherence to rules that no longer fit reality." "You're talking about exile." "I'm talking about evolution," the elder called out, pointing toward the boundary where the waiting riders had noticed their approach. Dust clouds suggested movement, preparation for whatever confrontation was coming. Time was running out for debate, for careful consideration of consequences. Soon there would be only action and reaction, choice and commitment. "Leah," Kehé said urgently, "I cannot make this decision for you, but I can promise that whatever you choose, you will not face it alone." She looked at him, this man who had watched over her with such careful attention, who had offered protection wrapped in understanding, who saw in her not a problem to be solved, but a person worthy of choice. She thought of Asda's wisdom about light revealing hidden things, of Ayana's words about courage being more important than fear. "The horses they mentioned in your grandfather's stories," she said. "The ones that choose their riders. What happens when the choice is mutual?" "They run," Kehé said simply, "together toward whatever horizon calls to them." Leah nodded, understanding at last the true nature of the bridge he'd been building between them. Not just connection, but transformation. Not just escape, but evolution into something neither could become alone. She turned toward the boundary, toward the men who waited to reclaim what they believed belonged to them, and felt something settle in her chest, like a key finding its lock. "Then, let's run," she said. What happened next would be debated around council fires for generations, though the truth of it lived primarily in the space between heartbeats, in the moment when decision crystallizes into action. Kehé spoke rapidly to the elder in their own language, words tumbling over each other with urgent intensity. The older man's face grew grave, then resigned, then something that might have been understanding. He looked long at Leah as if measuring her spirit against the weight of what was being proposed. Finally he nodded once and spoke to the other warriors. They wheeled their horses and began riding back toward home, leaving Kehé and Leah alone in the vast expanse between worlds. "What did you tell him?" Leah asked. "The truth," Kehé said, checking his weapons, his water, the supplies tied to his horse. "That some duties to the people require breaking faith with the people. That protecting our future sometimes means abandoning our past." In the distance, the waiting riders had begun to move, approaching the boundary with the confidence of men, accustomed to having their demands met. Garrett rode at their head, his pale hat a stark contrast against the red landscape, his posture radiating the kind of authority that came from never being truly challenged. "They'll follow us," Leah said. "Yes, they'll use this as proof that your people are hostile, untrustworthy. Perhaps, Kehé, I can't let you sacrifice everything," for he turned to her then, his expression so fierce and tender that her words died in her throat. "Leah Starlightbringer, do you think so little of my judgment that you believe I would throw away my life for anything less than truth? I don't understand." "Then understand this," he said, moving his horse closer until their knees nearly touched. 3 days ago, I was a warrior following orders, keeping watch over what others had decided was dangerous, but watching you, seeing how you carried yourself even in captivity, how you honored our ways without surrendering your own spirit, showed me something I had never seen before. What that courage is not about following the path laid out by others. It is about choosing the path that leads toward who you truly are, even when that choice costs everything you thought you wanted. The sound of approaching hooves grew louder. Soon there would be no time for words, only the hard reality of flight and pursuit across unforgiving terrain. "Where will we go?" Leah asked. "North," Kehé said, "to the canyon country where the old boundaries mean nothing, and survival depends on knowledge rather than politics. There are places there known only to the people, caves and springs where we can wait while the world decides what it wants to become." And after his smile was like sunrise over impossible terrain, after we write new stories, create new traditions, become the bridge we were meant to be, the riders were close enough now that individual voices could be heard, orders being given, strategies discussed. Garrett's voice carried over the desert air, demanding and familiar, speaking of rights and property and the natural order that must be maintained. Kehé extended his hand to Leah, an invitation and a promise wrapped in a single gesture. "Ready." She looked back once toward the settlement that had sheltered her, toward the people who had shown her kindness, despite their own uncertainty. Then she looked forward toward the vast expanse of desert and sky that waited beyond the horizon. Somewhere between those two directions lay the territory of choice, unmapped and full of possibility. "Ready," she said, and took his hand. They spurred their horses into motion, not toward the boundary but parallel to it, following ancient game trails that curved through landscape too rough for casual pursuit. Behind them, shouts of anger and surprise marked the moment when Garrett realized his quarry was not going to be delivered as expected. As they rode, Leah felt something she hadn't experienced in months, the pure exhilaration of movement toward choice rather than away from fear. The wind in her face carried sense of sage and freedom, and the horse beneath her moved with the easy rhythm of something born to run across open ground. Beside her, Kehé rode with the fluid grace of someone who had been shaped by this landscape from birth. His dark hair streamed behind him like a banner, and there was something in his expression that spoke of homecoming, despite the fact that they were fleeing everything he had ever known. "The turquoise," she called over the sound of hooves, and "wind. Your grandfather's stone, what was the rest of its story?" He said it only revealed its true power when worn by someone brave enough to travel between worlds. Kehé called back, "Someone willing to be transformed by the journey." Leah touched the pendant at her throat, feeling its warmth against her skin. Behind them, the dust of pursuing horses marked their trail across the desert floor. Ahead, the canyon. Country waited with all its hidden places and ancient wisdom. They rode toward uncertainty, toward transformation, toward whatever lay beyond the boundaries that fear had drawn across the landscape of possibility. And for the first time since leaving her grandmother's grave, Leah felt like she was riding toward home. The canyon country revealed itself gradually, like a secret being shared by degrees. First came the subtle shift in vegetation, pinyon, pine, and juniper replacing sage and creosote. Then the ground began to rise and fall in ways that spoke of water's patient work over countless centuries. Finally, the red rocks themselves emerged from the earth like sleeping giants, waking to greet the sun. Kehé guided them through landscape that seemed designed by spirits with a taste for both beauty and concealment. Hidden oyos provided routes invisible from above, while natural stone bridges offered passage across gaps that would stop most. Pursuit. It was clear he knew this territory with the intimate familiarity of someone who had explored it since childhood. Reading the rock like others read written words. They had been riding for 3 hours when he finally called a halt in the shadow of a towering sandstone formation that rose from the desert floor like a natural cathedral. Here, sheltered from wind and observation, they allowed their horses to rest while they assessed their situation. "They're still following," Leah said, though the pursuing dust cloud was now barely visible against the horizon. "Yes, but slowly." Kehé loosened his horse's girth and checked its feet for stones. Garrett's men know horses and military tactics, but they don't know this land. Every mile we travel here cost them 3 in confusion and caution. Leah slid down from her mount, feeling muscles protest after the hard ride. The silence of this place was profound, not empty, but full of the kind of deep quiet that spoke of ancient patience. She could hear her own heartbeat, the whisper of wind through stone, the distant call of a hawk riding thermal currents between the canyon walls. "Kehé," she said, settling beside him in the shade. "I need to understand something. Back there, when you chose to come with me, was that really your decision? Or did you feel obligated by honor or duty or whatever debt you thought you owed me?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hands busy with unnecessary adjustments to his gear. When he looked at her, his expression was thoughtful, almost surprised, as if the question had revealed something he hadn't fully acknowledged to himself. "When I was 12, he said finally, "my father took me to the place where he first saw my mother. It was at a summer gathering, representatives from many tribes coming together for trade and ceremony. He pointed to a spot near the dancing ground and said, 'There, that exact place.' That was where I looked at her and knew my life had just divided into before and after." Leah waited, understanding that this story was important in ways that went beyond mere narrative. "I thought I understood what he meant," Kay continued, "the dramatic nature of attraction, the way desire can feel like destiny. But I was wrong." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his palm. "It wasn't about wanting her, it was about recognition, seeing in another person the answer to questions you didn't know you were asking. And that's what happened with me. That's what happened with you." His eyes met hers, and she saw in them the same vulnerability she felt in her own chest. "From the first moment I was told to watch over you, something in me recognized something in you. Not desire, though that came later. Recognition, as if my spirit had been waiting for yours to arrive and show it what it was supposed to become." The words hung between them like an offering, significant and fragile. Leah felt her throat tighten with emotions she couldn't quite name. Gratitude, perhaps, or wonder, or the peculiar grief that comes with finding something precious just as you're forced to flee. "Your people," she said carefully. "They'll see this as betrayal. Some will. Others will understand that loyalty sometimes requires the courage to evolve." Kehé set the stone aside and looked out across the canyon country that stretched endlessly before them. "My grandfather once told me that tradition is like water. It must flow to stay pure. When it becomes stagnant, it begins to poison the very things it was meant to nourish. And if he was wrong, if tradition is more like stone, meant to be permanent, unchanging, then we'll carve new paths through it," Kehé said simply. The way water carved these canyons, a sound in the distance, the faint echo of horses moving over stone, reminded them that contemplation was a luxury they couldn't afford indefinitely. Kehé rose and began preparing their mounts for travel, his movements efficient and sure. "Where exactly are we going?" Leah asked, checking her own horse's tack. "There's a place my grandfather showed me when I was young, a hidden valley where water flows year-round, and the walls are too steep for horses that don't know the secret paths. We can wait there while our pursuers exhaust themselves in these canyons, and then we decide what kind of life we want to build in the spaces between worlds." As they mounted and resumed their journey deeper into the maze of stone, Leah found herself thinking about water and recognition, about the difference between choosing and being chosen. Behind them, somewhere, in the red dust and infinite sky, Thomas Garrett continued his pursuit of what he believed belonged to him. But with every mile they traveled into this landscape of hidden passages and ancient patience, Leah felt herself becoming something he would no longer recognize, not a possession to be reclaimed, but a force of nature moving toward her own true destination. The canyon walls rose higher around them, painted in bands of red and gold that spoke of millions of years of patient transformation. And in that vastness, two figures on horseback moved like prayers written in motion across the face of eternity. The descent into Kehé's secret place required dismounting and leading their horses down a narrow chimney in the rock that seemed designed to keep out anyone who didn't know exactly where to find it. The path switched back through layers of geological time, each turn revealing stone painted in different shades of red and gold, as if the earth were displaying its history in horizontal brushstrokes. "How did your grandfather find this place?" Leah asked, her voice echoing softly between the canyon walls. "He didn't find it," Kehé replied, testing each foothold before committing his weight. "It found him. He was tracking a wounded deer during a harsh winter, following blood drops for 3 days until the trail led him here. He said the deer was waiting for him at the bottom, healed as if the valley itself had medicine in its walls. The story had the ring of legend about it, the kind of tale that grew more magical with each telling. But as they descended deeper into the earth's embrace, Leah found herself believing in the possibility of places that existed outside normal geography, pockets of sanctuary hidden in the landscape, like blessings waiting to be discovered. The first sign that they were approaching something special was the sound of water, not the intermittent trickle common to desert country, but the steady music of a stream that knew no seasons of drought. Then came the green, cottonwoods, and willows clustered around running water, their leaves creating a canopy of coolness in the desert heat. When they finally emerged onto the valley floor, Leah caught her breath. The space was perhaps a quarter-mile across, perfectly circular, surrounded by sheer red walls that rose 300 ft toward a perfect circle of sky. Water bubbled up from a spring at the valley's heart, creating a pool clear as mountain air before flowing away into the rock through some hidden channel. "It's impossible," she whispered. "Yes," Kehé agreed, his voice carrying the same wonder she felt, completely impossible, which is why it's here. They watered their horses and picketed them near the good grass that grew in abundance around the spring. The animals seemed to sense the peace of this place, settling quickly into the rhythm of grazing and rest that spoke of deep safety. Even their tired mounts recognized sanctuary when they found it. As the afternoon light slanted down through the circle of sky above, painting the water in shades of gold and amber, Leah found herself studying Kehé's face in profile. There was something different about him here, a relaxation in his shoulders, a softness around his eyes that spoke of coming home. This place wasn't just a refuge for him. It was a revelation of who he might become when freed from the weight of others' expectations. "Tell me about your grandfather," she said, settling. Beside him on the soft grass near the water's edge, Kehé paused, searching for words. He was someone who understood that wisdom and tradition were not always the same thing. The elders respected his knowledge, but they were sometimes uncomfortable with his conclusions. What kind of conclusions? That the world was changing too fast for old responses to be sufficient. That the people would need to learn new ways of being in relationship with the earth, with other tribes, with the expanding American presence. Kehé picked up a smooth stone from the water's edge, weighing it in his palm. He said, "Survival required." The courage to become something new while still honoring what was essential from the past. Is that what we're doing? Becoming something new? "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I know that what exists between us, this recognition we spoke of, it feels like the beginning of an answer to questions I've been carrying my whole life." The honesty in his voice made Leah's chest tight with something that might have been hope or fear or both. She had spent so long running from definitions, from roles others wanted to impose on her, that the idea of consciously choosing to become something felt both liberating and terrifying. In my grandmother's stories, she said, there were always tests, challenges that revealed whether someone was ready for transformation or still trapped in old patterns. What kind of tests? Usually involving a choice between safety and truth, between the known path and the one that led toward who you were meant to become. She watched the water flow past, clear and constant. I think maybe this is our test. This valley, this moment, this decision about what to do next. Kehé nodded slowly. And if we fail, then we become exactly what everyone expects us to become. Fugitives, outcasts, people defined by what they're running from rather than what they're running toward. And if we succeed, Leah turned to face him fully, seeing in his dark eyes the same mixture of hope and uncertainty that lived in her own heart. Then we become the bridge you spoke of, the answer to questions about how love and tradition and change can exist in the same space, without destroying each other, as, if summoned by their words, the sound of distant voices echoed down from the canyon rim. Their pursuers still searching, still determined to reclaim what they believed belonged to them. But here, in this impossible valley, surrounded by walls that had stood for millennia, those voices seemed as distant and powerless as thunder from storms in other countries. They won't find us here, Kehé said with quiet confidence. No, Leah agreed, but we can't stay forever. No, eventually we'll have to choose what kind of story we want to be part of. The sun sank lower in the circle of sky above them, painting the water in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere above, Thomas Garrett continued his search for a woman who no longer existed, the frightened girl who had fled California months ago, who had allowed herself to be defined by others' desires and expectations. That woman was gone, transformed by desert heat and the recognition of her own worth, replaced by someone who understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to value something more than safety. As darkness gathered in the sea valley like a blessing, Leah felt herself settling into the truth of this place, this moment, this choice to trust in transformation rather than seek the familiar comfort of old prisons. Tomorrow would bring decisions and movement, and the hard work of building new kinds of bridges across ancient divides. But tonight, there was only the sound of running water and the steady presence of someone who saw her not as problem or possession, but as the answer to questions he was still learning to ask. Dawn came slowly to the hidden valley, light filtering down through the circle of sky like honey poured from heaven. Leah woke to the sound of water and bird song, momentarily disoriented by the absence of fear that had been her constant companion for so many months. Here, wrapped in stone and solitude, she had slept deeper than she had since leaving her grandmother's house. Kehé was already awake, sitting beside the pool, with his hands cupped around something small and gleaming. As she approached, she saw it was the wooden horse he had carved, its surface polished smooth by constant handling. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, settling beside him on the grass, still damp with dew. "I slept, but I dreamed." He turned the carving over in his palms, studying it as if seeing it for the first time. "My grandfather came to me. He said, 'The gift of recognition always comes with the responsibility of action.'" "What kind of action? That's what I've been trying to understand." Kehé held the horse up to catch the early light, and for a moment it seemed almost alive, captured in eternal motion between one world and another. "He told me that some bridges can only be built by those willing to stand in the middle, holding the span steady, while others decide whether to cross." Leah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. That sounds dangerous. Yes, but maybe necessary. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of voices echoed down from above, distant but unmistakably real. Their pursuers had not given up, had somehow traced them to this place that should have been beyond discovery. Kehé was on his feet instantly, moving to where their horses grazed peacefully in the morning light. "They found the entrance," he said grimly. "We have perhaps an hour before they figure out how to descend safely." Leah's mind raced through possibilities, all of them leading to the same conclusion. There's no other way out, is there? No. This valley has only one entrance. Kehé began saddling his horse with efficient movements, but his expression was thoughtful rather than panicked. Unless what? He paused in his work, looking at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Unless we don't try to run anymore. Unless we make our stand here in this place that has already given us so much. The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Leah understood what he was proposing. Not flight, but confrontation, not escape, but the courage to face whatever came next from a position of strength rather than fear. Against 6 armed men with military backing, not against them, C said carefully. For something. For the right. To choose our own path. For the truth that love doesn't recognize the same boundaries that fear creates. As if summoned by his words, the wooden horse seemed to catch the light differently, and Leah remembered his story about recognition and transformation, about bridges that could only be built by those willing to stand in dangerous places. "Your grandfather's dream," she said slowly. "It wasn't about running, was it?" No, it was about standing still long enough for truth to reveal itself. The voices from above were growing closer, along with the sound of equipment being lowered down the rock face. Soon Thomas Garrett would be here, along with his territorial authority and his absolute certainty about what belonged to whom. But in this valley that existed outside normal geography, surrounded by walls that had witnessed millennia of change, those certainties might prove less solid than he expected. "If we stay," Leah said, "if we make our stand here, what exactly are we fighting for?" Kehé finished saddling his horse and turned to face her fully. In the growing light, his face was transformed by something that might have been purpose or recognition or both. For the right to write our own story. For the possibility that love can create new traditions instead of just breaking old ones. For the chance to show that bridges between worlds can be built by people brave enough to stand in the space between. Leah felt something settle in her chest, like a key finding its lock. She thought of her grandmother's stories about tests and transformations, about the difference between courage and mere survival. She thought of the silver pendant at her throat, inheritance from one world, and the turquoise stone that connected her to another. "Then we stay," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "We make our stand here." Kehé's smile was like sunrise over impossible terrain. Together. Together. As the sounds of pursuit grew closer, they finished preparing their camp. Not for flight, but for welcome or confrontation, depending on how their visitors chose to see what they found. The hidden valley held its peace around them, water flowing, constant and clear, walls rising towards sky that knew no borders. And in that circle of stone and sanctuary, 2 souls prepared to defend not just their love, but the very possibility that new kinds of bridges could be built across the ancient divisions that kept hearts from recognizing their true homes. Thomas Garrett descended into the valley like a man reclaiming stolen property, his pale hat and expensive boots incongruous against the red stone and wild grass. The territorial soldiers followed him down the narrow path, their blue uniforms, dark with sweat, rifles held ready but not quite threatening. They moved with the careful confidence of men accustomed to having their authority acknowledged without question. Leah watched them from beside the spring, her heart steady despite the magnitude of what was approaching. Sai stood slightly behind her and to the right, positioned where he could see both their visitors and the valley's single entrance. His hand rested casually near his knife, not threatening, but ready. When Garrett reached the valley floor, he paused to survey the impossible landscape, his expression shifting from satisfaction to confusion to something that might have been awe. Whatever he had expected to find, it wasn't this place that seemed carved from dreams and legends. "Leah," he said finally, his voice carrying across the water with forced pleasantness, "you've led us quite a chase, my dear. Time to come home now." "I am home," she replied, surprised by how true the words felt. "This is where I belong." Garrett's face hardened. "You belong where law and custom decree, where your commitments place you." His gaze shifted to Kehé, and his expression turned ugly. "And you, boy, you've interfered with territorial citizens and military personnel. That's a serious crime in these parts." "I have protected someone who sought sanctuary," Kehé said, his voice calm but carrying undertones of steel. "Among my people, that is not crime but honor." "Your people," Garrett said the words like they tasted bitter. "Your people have no standing here. This is American territory now, governed by American law." One of the soldiers shifted uncomfortably, and Leah noticed he was younger than the others, his face uncertain as he looked around the valley. Perhaps he was beginning to understand that the simple story Garrett had told, rescuing a kidnapped woman from savage captives, didn't match the reality of what they'd found. "American law," Kehé repeated thoughtfully. "And what does American law say about a woman's right to choose her own path?" "Women choose within appropriate bounds," Garrett snapped, "within the structure of civilization, guided by those qualified to make such decisions." "And who decides these qualifications?" Leah asked, stepping forward. The morning light caught the silver and turquoise at her throat, and she saw several of the soldiers notice the pendants, symbols of two worlds, two choices, two kinds of belonging. "Law decides. Tradition decides the natural order." "The natural order," Kehé interrupted, "says that water flows toward its true level, that life grows where it finds nourishment, that hearts recognize truth without need for external authority." Garrett's hand moved toward his pistol, but one of the soldiers, the young one, spoke up unexpectedly. "Sir, with respect, the woman doesn't appear to be here against her will. She's been corrupted," Garrett said, not taking his eyes off Kehé. "Influenced by primitive thinking. She's not competent to make her own decisions. I'm competent enough to know the difference between protection and possession," Leah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Competent enough to choose love over law, when law serves only the comfort of those who make it." The words rang across the valley like a bell, clear and true and undeniable. Even the soldiers seemed affected, shifting uneasily as they began to understand that they weren't rescuing anyone. They were enforcing one man's wounded pride at gunpoint. "Enough," Garrett said, drawing his weapon. "You'll come with me now, Leah, or I'll have these men arrest your savage friend for kidnapping and interference with territorial authority. And if I refuse, then you'll be declared incompetent and returned to your guardian's custody regardless of your preferences. It was the oldest trap in the world. Submit or watch someone you love pay the price for your defiance." Leah felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders, the kind that reduced life to a series of serenas, disguised as decisions. But then T stepped forward, placing himself between Leah and the armed men. "There is another choice," he said quietly, "one that serves truth rather than convenience." "What choice?" Garrett demanded. T reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden horse, holding it up where everyone could see. In the morning light, it seemed almost alive, captured in eternal motion between worlds. "Trial by recognition," he said. "Let the woman speak her truth. Let those who hear decide whether she speaks with wisdom or corruption." Let the valley itself bear witness. Garrett laughed harshly. This isn't some primitive council meeting. This is American territory governed by American law. Then let American law show its wisdom. See challenged. If what you claim is true, if she is truly corrupted, truly incompetent, then her words will reveal it. But if what I believe is true, if she speaks with the voice of someone who has found her true home, then perhaps even American law must bow to truth when truth reveals itself. The challenge hung in the air like a bridge, half-built, waiting for someone brave enough to complete its span. Leah felt the weight of the moment, understanding that what happened next would ripple outward through time, affecting not just her own fate, but the very possibility of new kinds of justice in an old, scarred world. "Speak, then," she said, stepping forward to stand beside Kehé. "Let me speak my truth, and let all who hear decide what kind of law serves life, and what kind serves only the fear of change." In the hush that followed Leah's challenge, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Water continued its patient flow from spring to hidden channel, but even the birds had fallen silent, as if the earth itself were preparing to bear witness to whatever would be spoken in this impossible place. Thomas Garrett's face was flushed with anger, and something that might have been fear, not of physical danger, but of the possibility that his absolute certainties might prove less solid than the red rock surrounding them. "This is ridiculous," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not going to participate in some savage ritual." "Then listen," Leah said, her voice carrying clearly across the water. "Listen to what I have to say and decide for yourself whether you hear corruption or clarity." She moved to stand at the edge of the spring where the morning light struck the water and turned it into liquid crystal. The positioning was unconsciously symbolic. She stood at the source, the place where life emerged from hidden depths to nourish the world above. "My name is Leah Margaret Santos," she began, using her full name for the first time in months. "Granddaughter of Elena Santos, who taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to value something more than safety." The young soldier was watching her intently now, his expression thoughtful. Even one of the older men had lowered his rifle slightly, as if what he was hearing didn't match the story they'd been told. "6 months ago, I fled California to escape, a marriage that would have made me property rather than partner. I traveled alone because I believed somewhere in this vast country there had to be a place where a woman's worth wasn't measured by her willingness to surrender her spirit to someone else's convenience." "Lies," Garrett interrupted. But his protest sounded hollow, even to his own ears. "I was captured by accident," Leah continued, "brought to a people who had every reason to see me as a threat, but chose instead to offer sanctuary. I was guarded by a man whose duty was to watch me, but whose honor led him to see me." Her eyes found Kehé's, drawing strength from the recognition she saw there. "And in that seeing, I learned something I had never understood before." "What?" asked the young soldier, ignoring Garrett's sharp look. "That love is not about possession, but about recognition. That home is not a place you're born to, but a place where your spirit can grow toward what it was meant to become." Leah's voice, grow stronger, carried by conviction rather than mere words. That bridges between worlds can only be built by people willing to stand in the space between, holding the span steady while others decide whether to cross. The soldiers were listening now with a kind of attention that suggested they were hearing something unexpected, something that challenged their preconceptions about savage and civilized, about proper and improper, about what kind of choice a woman might be competent to make. "This man," Leah gestured toward Kehé, "has offered me no false promises, no guarantees of ease or comfort. He has offered me something far more precious, the chance to become who I truly am in partnership with someone who sees that truth as a gift rather than a threat." "She's been seduced," Garrett said desperately, "corrupted by primitive romanticism. She doesn't understand the consequences." "I understand perfectly," Leah said, turning to face him directly. "I understand that you see my refusal to marry you as a challenge to your authority, a threat to your reputation among men who measure their worth by their ability to control women." Her voice was steady, without anger, but without compromise. "I understand that you would rather drag me back to California in chains than accept that love cannot be compelled by law or custom or convenience." The words hung in the air like a judgment, pronounced by the valley itself. Even Garrett seemed affected, his face cycling through expressions of rage and something that might have been shame. "And I understand," Leah continued, her voice growing softer but no less firm, "that the choice I make you here will echo through generations. Will young women who come after me find a world where their spirits are allowed to grow toward their true homes? Or will they find only the same old cages painted in new colors, but serving the same function?" She looked around the circle of faces, soldiers uncertain, Garrett furious, Kehé steady as stone, and felt the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders like a mantle of light and responsibility. "I choose love over law when law serves only the comfort of those who make it. I choose recognition over possession, growth over safety, truth over the convenient fictions that keep the powerful comfortable and the powerless silent." The silence that followed was profound, weighted with the kind of truth that changes the shape of the world simply by being spoken aloud. Even the water seemed to flow more quietly, as if the earth itself were listening. Finally the young soldier spoke. "Sir," he said to Garrett, "I enlisted to protect American citizens, not to drag unwilling women back to unwanted marriages. She's not competent to refuse." "She sounds plenty competent to me," said another soldier, "more competent than most folks I've met." Garrett looked around the circle, seeing his authority crumbling like sand. "This is mutiny, dereliction of duty." "No, sir," the young soldier said quietly. "This is American law at its best. The law that says all people have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Even women who choose paths we don't understand." And in that moment, in a hidden valley that existed outside normal geography, witnessed by water and stone and sky, something new was born, not just the freedom of two souls to choose their own path, but the recognition that justice, like love, must evolve or die. The transformation began with departure, though not the kind anyone had expected. Thomas Garrett left first, his face gray with defeat, and something that might have been the beginning of unwelcome self-knowledge. He climbed out of the valley like a man ascending from his own grave, silent and diminished, followed by 3 of the soldiers who had chosen duty to law over duty to truth. But 2 remained, the young soldier and one of his companions, both men whose understanding of justice had been changed by what they'd witnessed in this impossible place. "We'll report that the woman was not held against her will." The young man told Kehé as they prepared to depart that she made her choice freely with full knowledge of the consequences. "And if your superiors question this judgment," the soldier smiled, "then we'll tell them to come see for themselves. Some truths can only be understood by those willing to climb down into the places where they live." As the last of their unexpected visitors disappeared up the narrow path, the valley settled back into its ancient rhythm of water and wind, and the patient growth of things that knew how to thrive in impossible places. Leah and Kehé stood beside the spring, watching light move across the circle of sky above them. The confrontation was over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold. They were free now, not just from pursuit, but from the old definitions that had constrained their possibilities. "What happens now?" Leah asked. Kehé reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden horse, its surface polished smooth by days of handling. But instead of keeping it, he held it out to her. Now we become the bridge we were meant to be, he said. But first, a gift freely given. Freely received. Leah took the carving, feeling its warmth, its perfect balance in her palm. The horse seemed almost alive, captured in eternal motion between one world and another. Like themselves, she realized, forever in transition, forever choosing movement over stagnation, growth over the comfortable certainties of staying still. It's beautiful, she said, but what it represents is even more beautiful, which is the courage to run towards something instead of just away from it. They left the valley the next morning, not because they had to, but because they were ready. Their horses climbed the narrow path toward the rim, toward whatever lay beyond the boundaries others had drawn across the landscape of possibility. At the top, they paused to look back at the impossible place that had sheltered their transformation. From above it seemed even more miraculous, a perfect circle of green in the endless red, a secret written in the earth's own hand. "Will we come back?" Leah asked. "Someday," Kehé said, "when we need to remember what's possible." They rode north then toward the territory where maps became suggestions, and survival depended more on wisdom than on the rigid adherence to rules that no longer fit reality. Behind them, the hidden valley held its peace, waiting for the next. Souls who would need sanctuary, while they learned to build bridges between the worlds that lived within their hearts. As they traveled, Leah felt the wooden horse in her pocket and the turquoise pendant at her throat, symbols of choice and recognition, of love that created new traditions instead of just breaking old ones. Beside her, Kehé rode with the easy grace of someone who had found his true direction, and together they moved across the landscape like a prayer written in motion, like the beginning of a story that would be told around fires for generations. The sun climbed higher, painting everything in shades of gold and promise. Somewhere ahead lay the future they would build together. Not perfect, but honest. Not easy, but true. Not guaranteed, but chosen with full knowledge of what choosing meant. And in the vast territory between what was and what could be, two souls rode toward the horizon where all bridges eventually lead toward.